Have you ever noticed that one of the heaviest burdens we carry is not our sorrow, but the guilt we feel when that sorrow begins to fade? There is a strange kind of suffering that happens when a deep, familiar pain starts to quiet down. Most people do not realize that healing can sometimes feel like a betrayal. If you have ever caught yourself smiling after a profound loss, only to immediately punish yourself for feeling joy, this is for you. Stay until the end, because the final lesson may change the way you see this invisible weight forever. When a massive loss enters our lives, it consumes everything. Grief becomes the air we breathe, the first thought when we wake up, and the heavy blanket we pull over ourselves at night. It is exhausting, but it is also a testament to how much we cared, how much we loved, how much that person, that dream, or that chapter of our lives truly mattered. But then time does what time always does. It moves forward. And slowly, almost invisibly, the sharp edges of your grief begin to soften. You wake up one morning and realize you have not thought about your loss. Yet today, you laugh at a joke. You enjoy the warmth of the sun. You make plans for the future. And then, suddenly, a cold wave crashes over you. Guilt. A desperate, panicked voice inside your mind whispers that you are forgetting. It tells you that if you are no longer in agonizing pain, it means you no longer care. In Buddhist thought, we examine the nature of clinging. We often think of attachment as clinging to physical things, to wealth, or to people. But one of the deepest lessons of Buddhism is that we can also become fiercely attached to our own suffering. We hold on to our grief because we have confused the pain of loss with the presence of love. We believe that to let go of the suffering is to let go of the memory. Imagine a person carrying a heavy stone through a barren desert. The stone was given to them by someone they loved dearly. Because it is the only thing they have left of that person, they carry it tightly against their chest. Over time, their arms ache, their back bows, and they are exhausted. Someone asks them to set the stone down, just for a moment, to rest. But they refuse. They cry out, "If I put the stone down, I am abandoning the one who gave it to me." Think about your own life. When the quiet moments come, when the tears stop flowing and the heaviness lifts slightly, do you panic and pick the heavy stone back up? Do you force yourself to feel sad because you believe it is the only way to prove your loyalty? You might find yourself replaying painful memories, consciously tearing open a healing wound, just to make sure you can still feel the sting. Ask yourself this: is the person, the memory, or the love you are honoring truly served by your endless suffering? Does your pain keep them alive, or does it only keep you trapped? Pause, breathe. Observe this guilt without following it down the spiral. Let the feeling of betrayal rise in your chest. Acknowledge it, and realize that it is only a thought. It is not the truth. You are not required to suffer indefinitely to prove that your love was real, because peace is not an insult to what you have lost. It is the natural resting place of a heart that is slowly learning how to hold memory without holding agony. But recognizing this guilt is only the first step. To truly find peace, we must unlearn the broad, deepest lie our minds tell us when we are grieving. And this is where the next truth begins. 2. The illusion that suffering equals loyalty. Here is a truth that goes against everything our minds tell us when we are hurting. Your pain is not a monument to your love. When we experience a profound loss, we naturally want to honor what was taken from us. But somewhere along the way, the mind makes a quiet, dangerous calculation. It begins to equate the depth of our suffering with the depth of our devotion. We start to believe that moving on means moving away. We convince ourselves that if the ache in our chest disappears, the importance of what we lost disappears with it. We treat our grief like a sacred flame, and we become terrified of letting it burn out. We think that feeding the fire with our own sadness is the only way to prove we have not forgotten. In Buddhist thought, we examine how deeply we attach our identities to our emotions. Buddhism teaches us that while the initial pain of loss is an unavoidable part of the human experience, the prolonged, self-inflicted suffering that follows is often a choice born of attachment. We cling to the suffering because it feels like a bridge to the past. But Buddhism reminds us that true love and pure memory are not heavy. They do not require you to carry a burden to prove they exist. The illusion is believing that love cannot survive without pain holding its hand. Imagine a dedicated gardener who spent years tending to a magnificent, towering tree. One night, a violent storm comes and uproots the tree completely. The gardener is devastated, but instead of honoring the tree by planting new seeds in the fertile soil it left behind, the gardener stands by the fallen trunk day after day. They refuse to look at the open sky. They refuse to tend to the rest of the garden. They weep over the broken wood, believing that watering the dead branches with their tears is the only way to prove how beautiful the tree once was. But the tears do not resurrect the tree. They only turn the rest of the garden into a wasteland. We do exactly this in our modern lives. We do it when we finally have a peaceful day, when we laugh out loud at a conversation with a friend, or when we catch ourselves enjoying a quiet evening without tears. Suddenly, the mind snaps like a trap. The guilt rushes in, whispering, "How dare you be okay? Have you forgotten so soon?" We immediately stop smiling. We actively pull the heavy blanket of grief back over our shoulders, believing we are doing the right and loyal thing by returning to the dark. Think about your own life. What are you still holding on to because you are afraid of who you will be without it? Ask yourself, if the person or the dream you lost could speak to you right now, would they demand that you suffer forever in their name? Would they want your joy to end simply because that chapter ended? You do not need to keep the wound open to prove that the injury was real. Let the feeling of okayness arise without viewing it as a betrayal. Pause, breathe. When the guilt of feeling happy tries to pull you back, observe it without obeying it. You can gently tell your mind, "My love remains," even when the pain subsides. You can honor the past while still allowing the sun to warm your face today, because peace does not erase the past. It simply gives you the strength to carry it without breaking. But to fully release this guilt, we must look at the fundamental nature of the universe itself. We must understand why even the deepest sorrow eventually quiets down. And this is where the next truth begins. 3. The law of impermanence. Here is the truth few people want to face. Nothing in this world is meant to stay exactly the same forever, not even your deepest sorrow. When we are in the grip of fresh grief, the pain is so absolute that we cannot imagine a reality without it. We expect our sorrow to remain frozen in time, sharp and unyielding. And so, when the intensity begins to shift, when the heavy, crushing weight turns into a quiet, dull ache, we resist it. We think we are doing something wrong. We panic, trying to force the grief to stay vivid, as if letting it fade means we are losing the person, the relationship, or the dream all over again. We try to control the timeline of our healing by rejecting the healing itself. Buddhist wisdom teaches the profound truth of impermanence. Everything in this existence is in constant motion. The seasons change, the tides rise and fall, and human emotions are no different. In Buddhism, much of our suffering comes from trying to make permanent what is naturally meant to pass. We try to freeze the river of our experience. But impermanence is not a punishment. It is the great mercy of the universe. It is the universal law that guarantees no storm, no matter how violent, can rage forever. Imagine a jagged, broken piece of glass that falls into the ocean. At first, its edges are incredibly sharp. If you touch it, It will cut you deeply, but over years and years, the ocean currents roll that glass across the sand. The water does not destroy the glass. It does not erase it. But the constant rhythmic motion of the waves gently softens the sharp edges. Eventually, it becomes a piece of sea glass, smooth, quiet, and safe to hold. It is still the exact same piece of glass, but it no longer cuts the hand that holds it. We fight this natural smoothing process in our own lives. We experience a deep loss, a painful separation, or a devastating failure, and our hearts are broken into sharp pieces. But as the months and years flow by, life continues to move around us. The edges of our pain naturally begin to soften. Yet, instead of letting the ocean do its work, we reach in and try to sharpen the glass again. We feel guilty for not bleeding anymore. We compare our current quietness to the day the wound happened, and we judge ourselves for no longer falling apart. Ask yourself, are you fighting the natural healing of your own heart? Are you resisting the mercy of time because you mistake a smooth edge for a lack of love? What are you afraid will happen if you simply let the ocean do its work? Pause, breathe. Observe the changing nature of your feelings without judging them. You do not have to force the pain to stay loud. Let the quietness enter without treating it as an intruder. Let your grief soften. Let the sharp edges become smooth, because healing is not an erasure of what happened. It is the universe allowing you to survive it. But understanding that grief softens is only part of the journey. What happens when the quiet is suddenly broken by a wave of sorrow you thought had faded forever? And this is where the next truth begins. 4. Making room for the unexpected guest. What if healing is not a final destination you suddenly arrive at, but a wide landscape you must continuously walk through? Here is a truth that can save you from years of unnecessary struggle. Healing from a deep loss is never a straight line. We often believe that once the heavy, blinding grief begins to quiet down, it is gone forever. We think we have finally crossed a finish line. So when a profound wave of sorrow suddenly crashes over us, weeks, months, or even years later, our first reaction is sheer panic. We feel like we have failed. We clench our fists and tell ourselves, "I should be over this by now." We try to forcefully shove the emotion away, terrified that letting it back in means all our progress was an illusion, and we are right back at the very beginning. In Buddhist thought, we practice radical acceptance. We are taught to observe our emotions without judgment and without resistance. Much of our prolonged suffering arises when we demand that reality be different than it is in this exact moment. When sorrow unexpectedly returns to your mind, it is not a sign of your personal failure. It is simply a temporary condition, a movement of the present moment. Buddhism reminds us to greet all passing emotions as visitors. We do not have to trap them inside, but we must not violently barricade the door against them either. Imagine you are sitting in a quiet, warm house on a peaceful evening. Suddenly, there is a heavy, persistent knock at the door. You look outside and see an uninvited guest standing in the cold rain. It is your grief, returning when you least expected it. If you refuse to open the door, the guest will only pound louder. They will rattle the windows and shake the walls, filling your entire home with the deafening noise of your own resistance. But if you gently open the door, invite the guest inside, and offer them a seat by the fire without demanding they explain why they are there, something beautiful shifts. The guest will sit in silence. They will warm themselves. And eventually, when they are ready, they will stand up and leave completely on their own. We face this unexpected guest constantly in our daily lives. You might be driving, feeling completely fine and at peace, when suddenly a specific song plays. A certain date approaches on the calendar. You catch a familiar scent in the air, or you walk past a quiet cafe that holds a profound memory. In an instant, The heavy sadness is right back in your chest, pulling the breath from your lungs. Our immediate modern instinct is to run. We distract ourselves, we grab our phones, we swallow the lump in our throat, and we scold ourselves for being so fragile today. We try to force the door shut. Think about your own life. When the sadness returns unannounced, how do you treat it? Do you greet it with patience, or do you treat it like an enemy that must be destroyed? Are you exhausted from constantly trying to guard the door to your own heart? Pause, breathe. When the sudden wave hits you, do not fight the water. Say quietly to yourself, "I see you. You are allowed to be here right now." Let the feeling rise and fall without making it your permanent identity, because making room for your grief does not mean you are moving backward. It simply means your heart has grown spacious enough to hold both your lingering pain and your growing peace at the exact same time. But in our desperation to stop hurting, we often create a different kind of invisible prison for ourselves. We begin watching the calendar. And this is where the next truth begins. 5. The danger of the invisible clock. What if the pressure to heal by a certain date is actually the very thing keeping you wounded? Here is a hard truth about human nature. We are obsessed with measuring our pain. When we suffer a profound loss, society subtly hands us an invisible clock. We are given a few weeks to mourn, a few months to adjust, and perhaps a year to move on. We internalize this timeline and start tracking our own progress like a project. If months have passed and we are still crying over a memory, we feel broken. But even worse, if only a short time has passed and we suddenly feel light and joyful, a suffocating guilt rushes in. We look at the invisible clock and panic. We think, it is too soon to feel this good. I must not have cared enough. We become trapped in an exhausting paradox, punishing ourselves for healing too slowly and feeling profoundly guilty for healing too fast. Buddhist wisdom teaches us the immense danger of trying to control what is fundamentally natural. We suffer deeply because we try to force our internal, emotional reality to match an external, artificial expectation. In Buddhism, the practice of non-attachment applies not just to physical things or outcomes, but to our rigid expectations of time. The mind desperately wants a schedule. It wants a predictable linear path from sadness to closure. But the heart does not wear a watch. By demanding that your grief adhere to a calendar, you are resisting the natural, unfolding rhythm of your own life. Imagine a farmer who plants a seed in the dark, fertile earth. For weeks, the ground remains flat and quiet. Frustrated by the lack of visible progress, the farmer begins digging up the dirt every single day to check if the seed has sprouted. In their desperation to see it grow, they pull on the tiny, fragile roots, trying to force them upward. By constantly interfering and demanding that the seed grow on a strict, visible schedule, the farmer destroys the very life they were trying to nurture. True growth happens quietly, in the dark, at its own perfect pace. You cannot pry a flower open before it is ready to bloom, and you cannot force a broken heart to mend on a deadline. We feel the ticking of this invisible clock constantly in our daily lives. It happens when well-meaning friends gently ask, "Are you still upset about that?" It happens when an anniversary of a loss approaches, and we put massive pressure on ourselves to feel a certain way. It happens when we compare our own messy, unpredictable emotional state to the seemingly perfect lives of others. The pressure to present a neatly healed, perfectly timed version of ourselves to the world creates a heavy, secondary layer of suffering. Think about your own life. Who placed this invisible clock in your mind? Ask yourself, are you judging your own heart for taking the exact amount of time it needs? Or are you feeling guilty because your heart is ready to rest before the calendar says it should? Pause, breathe, take off the invisible watch. Stop checking the calendar to see if your feelings are valid. Let your healing take as long or as little time as it requires. Do not apologize for your pace. You are not falling behind, and you are not moving too fast, because true healing is not a deadline you meet. It is a slow, quiet surrender to the rhythm of life itself. But once we let go of the timeline, we must learn how to relate to the grief that still occasionally remains. We must understand how its nature fundamentally changes, and this is where the next truth begins. 6. The river and the stone. What if the goal of healing was never to remove the grief, but to let your life flow around it? Here is a truth that can bring immense relief to an exhausted heart. You do not have to erase what happened in order to be at peace. When we carry a heavy loss, we often fall into a trap of extremes. We either want to violently eradicate the pain, so we never have to feel it again, or we want to keep it constantly at the center of our lives, so we do not feel guilty for moving forward. We think that healing means waking up one day and discovering the grief has completely vanished. So when we realize that a quiet, lingering sadness is still sitting in the background of our lives, we feel defeated. And when our life starts to feel joyful again, we feel a sudden wave of guilt, believing we have carelessly abandoned our sorrow. We exhaust ourselves trying to manage the exact size and shape of our pain. In Buddhist thought, we are guided toward the practice of expansive awareness. Buddhism reminds us that our true nature is vast. Suffering often occurs because we narrow our entire existence down to the exact size of our pain. We try to force the obstacle out of the way, aggressively resisting its presence. But true peace does not come from destroying the obstacle. It comes from expanding the space around it. Imagine a heavy, jagged stone dropped into a very narrow, shallow stream. Because the stream is small, the stone blocks the flow completely. The water violently crashes against the rock, churning and splashing in constant turbulence. There is no peace, only friction. But as the years pass, the rains come. The banks of the stream stretch and widen. The stream slowly grows into a deep, vast, powerful river. The stone has not moved. It has not shrunk. It is still sitting right there at the bottom. But the river is now so deep and so wide that the water flows peacefully over and around it. The turbulence is gone, not because the stone disappeared, but because the river expanded. This is exactly what happens as you continue to live your life. You slowly build new daily habits. You share a quiet evening with a friend. You find comfort in a simple routine. Your life slowly widens. The stone of your loss is still there, but because your life has grown around it, you are no longer constantly crashing against it. Yet, the mind plays a cruel trick. When you finally notice how peacefully your life is flowing, you look down at the stone and feel a sudden pang of guilt. You think, I should still be crashing against it. I should still be broken. Think about your own life. Are you punishing yourself for becoming a wider river? Do you believe you must remain narrow, shallow, and turbulent just to prove that your loss was real and profound? Pause. Breathe. Let your life widen. You do not have to pull the stone from the bottom of the river, but you do not have to crash against it forever. You are allowed to let the water flow quietly, because the expansion of your life is not an abandonment of your past. It is the very container that keeps your memories safe. But as the river widens, we must learn a new way to interact with what rests beneath the water. We must learn how to look at the stone without drowning in sorrow all over again. And this is where the next truth begins. 7. Remembering without suffering. What if you could hold a precious memory in your hands without letting it cut you? Here is a truth that is incredibly difficult to accept when we are healing. Memory and suffering are not the same thing. When we carry a deep loss, we naturally fuse the memory of what we loved with the pain of losing it. For a long time, they are entirely inseparable. You cannot think of the past without feeling a sharp, physical ache in your chest. But as time passes, a gap begins to form. You might look at an old photograph, hear a specific name, or revisit a deeply meaningful place, and realize that you are simply smiling. You talk about the past and your voice does not break. But instead of feeling profound relief, your mind immediately attacks you. Guilt rushes in. We falsely believe that if we remember without agonizing pain, we are disrespecting the memory. We think that suffering is the only glue keeping us connected to what is gone. In Buddhist practice, we learn the vital art of separating the truth of a moment from the emotional reaction we attach to it. This is the essence of mindfulness. We are taught that we can observe a thought or a memory without automatically wrapping it in a heavy layer of suffering. Buddhism invites us to understand that our pain does not protect our memories. In fact, intense clinging and constant suffering often distort the past, turning beautiful things into nothing more than sources of tragedy. By letting go of the emotional attachment, we are not letting go of the memory itself. We are simply wiping the dirt off a beautiful glass so we can see it clearly. Imagine a perfectly still, deep lake at night. High above, a bright, beautiful moon shines down, and its reflection rests perfectly on the surface of the water. If the water is turbulent, thrashing, and violently stirred by a storm, the reflection of the moon is shattered into 1,000 distorted pieces. You cannot see its true beauty. You only see the chaos of the restless water. But when the wind dies down and the lake finally becomes completely calm, the reflection of the moon is pristine, whole, and perfectly clear. The still water does not reject the moon. It holds it flawlessly. We experience this turbulent water in our own modern lives. We hear a song that once made us pull our car over and weep, and today, we simply listen to it while washing the dishes. We share a story about someone we lost, and instead of ending in tears, it ends in quiet laughter. But in that exact moment of peace, our guilt acts like a heavy stone thrown right into the center of the lake. We deliberately disrupt our own calm, splashing and thrashing, because we feel terribly guilty for being still. Think about your own life. Are you deliberately throwing stones into your own calm waters? Are you afraid that if you do not feel the agonizing sting of loss, the memory will somehow float away and disappear completely? Ask yourself, does the memory truly need your pain to survive? Pause, breathe. Let the memory arise without forcing the sadness to accompany it. You can look at the past with a quiet heart. You can smile at what was, without weeping for what is no longer. Because a peaceful memory is the purest way to honor what you loved. It is not an erasure. It is a clear, beautiful reflection. But to truly embrace this quiet reflection, we must learn to appreciate the silence that follows a long and heavy storm. And this is where the next truth begins. 8. The beauty of the quiet echo. What if the silence you are so afraid of is actually the sound of your own healing? Here is a truth that is often terrifying to a heart that has been hurting for a very long time. Peace can feel incredibly empty at first. When we endure a massive loss, the grief is deafening. It fills every corner of our mind. It dictates our choices, our exhaustion, and our tears. We become intimately familiar with the sheer noise of our own suffering. So, when that noise slowly begins to fade, when days or weeks pass without a breakdown, a profound quiet settles in. But instead of feeling relieved, we feel a sudden, jarring panic. We mistake the quiet for absence. We falsely believe that if our grief is not screaming, it has packed up and left completely, taking our love and our memories with it. The guilt rushes in, urging us to make some noise, to cry, to stir up the pain, simply to prove the room is not empty. In Buddhist thought, we are invited to embrace the profound power of emptiness and silence. We learn that much of our suffering comes from our addiction to noise, even the noise of our own pain. Buddhism reminds us that when the mind stops violently clinging to a heavy emotion, a vast, quiet space naturally opens up. This quiet is not a void, it is not an abandonment, it is the sacred space where true presence finally becomes possible. Imagine a massive, ancient bronze bell hanging in the center of a quiet courtyard. When the bell is first struck by a heavy wooden beam, the sound is absolute. It is overwhelming, vibrating through the air and shaking the very floorboards beneath your feet. You cannot hear anything else. But as the hours pass, the violent vibration begins to lessen. The sound stretches out, growing softer and softer. Eventually, it becomes a beautiful, low, resonant hum, a quiet echo that you can only hear if you are completely still. The bell is still ringing. The impact was real, but it no longer shakes the foundation. We experience this quiet echo in our own lives, yet we constantly misinterpret it. You might be sitting on a quiet Sunday morning, drinking a warm cup of tea. You think of what you lost, and instead of a crushing wave of despair, you feel a gentle, lingering warmth, a soft hum. But immediately, your mind recoils. The guilt tells you that you are supposed to be shaking. You feel terrible that you are just sitting there, calmly drinking tea, while the memory is still so deeply important. You want to strike the bell again just to feel the floorboards shake, because you confuse the violence of the vibration with the truth of the sound. Think about your own life. Are you terrified of the quiet because you have forgotten how to live without the noise of your own pain? Ask yourself, what if the soft hum is exactly what the bell was meant to do all along? Pause, breathe, listen to the silence without trying to fill it with guilt. When you notice the quietness of your grief, do not strike the bell again. Let the echo be soft. You are allowed to stop shaking, because the softening of your grief is not the end of your love. It is simply your heart learning a new language. But to truly let go of this final layer of guilt, we must look at who we are becoming in the aftermath. And this is where the final truth begins. 9. A new kind of peace. What if the greatest act of love is finally allowing yourself to be okay? We began this journey by looking at the heavy, invisible weight of guilt, that sudden, suffocating panic that rushes in when you catch yourself smiling after a profound loss. For so long, you have lived with the terrifying belief that if you stop hurting, you are abandoning your past. You have carried your grief like a heavy stone through a barren desert, mistaking the exhaustion in your arms for a testament of your loyalty. You have fought the quiet, rejected the calm, and constantly checked the invisible clock, demanding that your heart either bleed more or heal on a rigid schedule. But here is the truth. Your suffering was never the bridge that kept you connected to what you lost. It was only the storm that temporarily blocked your view. Buddhist wisdom does not ask you to forget what you have lost. It does not ask you to erase your past or pretend the profound wound never happened. It simply asks you to stop clinging to the pain out of fear. It teaches us that true love, true memory, and true reverence are inherently peaceful. They do not require you to constantly break your own heart just to prove they are real. Think about everything we have explored. The ocean does not destroy the glass. It gently softens its sharp edges so you can finally hold it safely. The river does not erase the stone. It simply widens its banks so the water can flow peacefully around it. The still lake does not reject the moon. It finally becomes calm enough to reflect its light clearly. And the heavy bronze bell does not stop ringing. It simply softens into a beautiful, quiet hum that you can only hear when you are still. This is what is happening to you right now. Your life is widening. Your waters are calming. The echo is growing soft. And this is not a betrayal. This is grace. You have suffered enough. You have paid your dues to grief in tears, in sleepless nights, and in 1,000 heavy sighs. The person you loved, the dream you held, or the beautiful chapter you are mourning would not want your life to remain a permanent monument to sorrow. They would want you to feel the warmth of the sun again. You are allowed to be present in this current chapter of your life. Trust that stepping fully into today does not mean you are erasing yesterday. It simply means you are choosing to live. Pause, breathe, let that sink in. You do not have to force the door shut when the unexpected guest of sorrow returns, but you also do not have to invite them to stay forever. You can make room for your grief without demanding that it leave and without demanding that it stay. You can just be exactly where you are. Ask yourself one final time, are you ready to set the heavy stone down? Are you ready to let the river flow? If these lessons touched your heart, share this video with someone who may need a little more peace today. You can let go now.